In this lesson, we'll take a look at the process of glazing with acrylic paints. Using this process, we'll create a black and white painting first, concentrating on the values, and add a series of translucent glazes to add the color. We'll start with a light contour line drawing completed with graphite on the canvas. Then we'll start developing the black and white underpainting. This initial application of values is considered an underpainting since it will sit as its own layer underneath the colored glazes. At this point in the process, we're concentrating only on the values that we see in the reference. We're concentrating on creating a full range of value, meaning that we'll develop the darkest darks and the lightest lights and all of the midtones in between. Because we'll be relying heavily on the glazes that we'll apply later in the process to develop the colors within the scene, we'll spend quite a bit of time developing the value range in this early stage. And what exactly is value, and why is it so important? Value is the darkness or lightness of a color. It's how we understand the world around us, and the placement of the values within the scene tells us about the light within the scene and the form of the subjects. If you're finding it difficult to find the values in your subject, you may try squinting at your subject. When we squint, we can blur out some of the details that may get in the way, making it a little bit easier to see the shapes of values. It's also important to recognize that value is all dependent on the contrast of the values around them. In other words, a darker value may appear even darker if lighter values are right next to it. The same thing is true for lighter values. Lighter values may seem stronger or lighter if darker values are right next to it. For this reason, we may have to go back and alter values once they're in place, since other values that sit right next to them will alter the way that they're perceived. This process of painting, where values are developed before addressing color, is referred to as indirect painting. If colors and values are developed in the painting simultaneously, the process is considered direct painting, which is also called alla prima. Indirect painting is considered to be more of a classical approach to painting. Each approach has its own advantages, and both methods can be used within the same painting. With direct painting, the hue, value, and saturation of the color is mixed before applying it to the canvas. The goal is to find the right color the first time. With the approach that we are taking here, indirect painting, we can separate the process, concentrating on values first, and then the colors when glazes are applied. In most circumstances, the underpainting is developed monochromatically, meaning that it uses only one color. In this case, our underpainting is created in grayscale, meaning that a range of gray tones are used. If the goal is to create a cooler undertone, then a range of blues can be used for the underpainting. If the goal is to create a warmer undertone, then an underpainting of browns using perhaps raw umber can be substituted. The gray underpainting created here is created by using a mixture of carbon black and titanium white. For this example, we are addressing each section of the subject before moving on to the next. Values are developed completely. The approach that I prefer to take involves blocking in the entire section with a base tone, which makes up the majority of the section. From there, I can add lighter and darker values to develop the details and texture. With each layer of value that is added, the form of the subject starts to take shape. For areas that are mostly dark, we can start with a darker value and progressively get lighter with applications, working our way up to the highlights. For locations that are mostly light, the opposite is true. We may start with lighter values and develop the details by adding darker values. We can see how this approach is taken with the topping on the cheesecake. The entire section is first addressed with a dark gray. On top of this application, progressively lighter grays are applied, working our way up to the lightest highlights. However, as grays are applied and the contrast in values are compared, some areas are altered, making them either darker or lighter. We can continue working the values until we reach a point where we are satisfied with the tonal relationships. Our goal is to create an illusion. In most cases, this illusion is achieved by simply matching the shapes of values with what is observed in the reference or the subject. While it's important to try and match the shapes that are observed as closely as possible, often a close match will suffice. Try not to put undue pressure on yourself to be perfect. We are creating a painting, not a photograph. The manner in which you, the artist, interprets what you see is part of your artistic style. Don't be afraid to embrace your own unique style. The topping is both semi-translucent and wet. To create this illusion, some of the topping has locations where smooth gradations or transitions of value occur, but others where strong highlights exist. Many of these highlights are laid directly over locations of darker value. In this case, the highlights are plentiful, as light is reflected in every location where the form of the topping changes. Acrylic paints dry incredibly fast. This is both an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage, of course, is that we can develop layers quickly without waiting long periods for the paint to dry. The disadvantage is that the quick drying time means that blending can be difficult. Approaches can be taken to blend the paints or create the impression of blending. One approach is to thin the paint with water, extending the drying time. Be careful not to thin the paint too much, however. Too much water will result in the paint not sticking to the canvas. You can also use mediums that extend the drying time. Even with water or drying retardants, the paint will still dry very, very quickly. In these cases, you can layer a semi-transparent application thinned with water over dry areas. This glaze can create the impression of blending by smoothing transitions of value. Now, with the form of the cherry defined with a medium light gray, we can add strong highlights. Like with the topping, the cherry is wet and reflective. For this reason, several strong highlights exist. To increase the intensity of the highlights, less water is used and the paint is applied without much thinning. Work then continues on the stem. Again, the shape is first addressed with a base tone. From there, darker and lighter values are added. In this case, the light source is originating from the right, producing lighter values on the right side of the stem and darker ones on the left. With the underpainting complete, we can begin applying glazes. For this demonstration, we'll use a bit of glazing medium and a bit of water. Glazing medium is not required to create an effective glaze. Matte medium and even water alone can be used. The glaze is created by mixing color with a liberal amount of the medium and water. The glaze is very translucent. The goal is not to layer one glaze, but several. With each glazed layer, the color will grow stronger in intensity. Although having a specific color scheme in mind is not necessary, it does help to unify the painting. In this example, we'll focus on developing a scheme that is mostly primary, using blue, red, and yellow. This type of color scheme is considered a color triad, consisting of 3 colors equal distant from each other on the color wheel. Several glazes of blue mixed with cerulean blue and a touch of viridian green are applied on the table before applying a yellow glaze over the plate. The yellow glaze is created by mixing Indian yellow hue and cadmium yellow light. The yellow may seem strong at this point, but it will be muted in a moment. A bit of raw umber is also glazed in areas to warm the shadows slightly. Glazing is not just reserved for adding color. It can also be used to mute colors or alter the value. In this case, a glaze of titanium white is used to mute the yellow and lighten the value slightly. Glazes are applied with a soft brush in order to minimize visible brushstrokes. Harder bristles, such as hog hair bristles, will create unwanted streaks and visible lines. In this case, a soft nylon brush is used. Thicker applications of paint can still be applied over glazes. As we can see here, a darker mixture of raw umber is used to clean up the cast shadow behind the cheesecake. The shape of the brush used to apply glazes is up to the artist. I prefer to use a bright or flat brush for larger areas and a round one for smaller ones. Each glaze that is applied is allowed to dry completely before applying the next. If the glaze is not completely dry, some of the pigment may be removed, resulting in an uneven application. We'll continue applying glazes, adjusting the value and the color of the plate until we arrive at a point where we're satisfied with the locations of highlights and shadows and the amount of color that's showing through the lighter glazes. Next, we'll turn our attention to the cherry. A glaze is mixed using cadmium red light and a touch of alizarin crimson. Multiple glazes are applied over the entire shape and the stem, progressively intensifying the color. Thick applications of titanium white are applied over the top, intensifying the highlights. A mixture of Indian yellow, titanium white, and a touch of raw umber is glazed in multiple layers over the cheesecake. A slightly browner version is used for the crust. Darker values can then be re-established and enhanced over the top. For the topping, a glaze mixed with alizarin crimson and a touch of cadmium red light is applied. Again, multiple glazes are applied, each making the color a bit stronger. This process of indirect painting may seem labor-intensive, and it is, but it allows the artist to separate the painting process into two distinct processes, one in which the values are developed and a second in which the colors are developed. But it also has other advantages. With direct painting, color mixing is more complex since the value and intensity of the color must be determined before adding it to the canvas. With indirect painting, colors and values are easily altered after they have been applied. Another advantage is the reaction of physical light with the painting. Light is reflected through each layer of glaze, producing luminous colors and added depth. Optical color mixing can occur as well. A layer of blue glaze over an area of red, for example, would produce a violet. So we'll continue to apply various concentrations of the cadmium red light mixed with alizarin crimson, of course in a glaze form, over the top. And each glaze that we add, the color becomes more intense, and the transparency that happens with this topping becomes more and more clear. And then, of course, all that's left to do to complete the painting is to go back and reestablish some of those strong highlights that happen. Of course, we'll use the titanium white in a thicker manner here. Of course, these aren't glazes. We're applying the paint directly over the top of the glazed surface. This, of course, produces that reflective look that we're after, making the cheesecake look irresistible. Now, this has been a very basic demonstration of indirect painting, creating an underpainting and then layering colored glazes on top. Many layers of glaze can be applied if you so desire to any subject that you choose to paint. But for now, we'll call this piece finished. I hope that you found this lesson helpful, and I wish you the very best in your painting adventures. If you're ready to learn more about drawing and painting, then why not check out our extensive membership program, which includes comprehensive video courses, weekly live lessons, ebooks, lesson plans, and much more. Just click on the button in the center of your screen or click on the card in the upper right-hand corner to learn more.